And before we dive into our conversation about media and AI, I thought I'd make some introductions. First of all, actually, to start with me, I'm Sam Bogoch, CEO of Axel AI, and along with Eleanor Powers and the Harvard Alumni Association, we organized this event. But I really want to thank specifically our sponsors, starting with NetApp and Microsoft, who obviously Microsoft provided the space. NetApp has been generous enough to provide the food and drink, which is great. And we actually have Tom Nodine of NetApp here. There he is in the back, yeah, who's their America's VP. And I don't know, you want to say a word or two, or are you good?
No, just thank you very much for coming. Really appreciate it on Thursday night. I think we bought too much food, so if you know any friends and family, take it home with you. But really, just really appreciate you guys joining us tonight, and really the event and our panel tonight. So looking forward to getting some feedback because we're looking to do this in multiple cities. So love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks. Just to reinforce that, I was just 2 days ago visiting a customer in California, and they walked me through their data center, and they had over a petabyte of NetApp equipment coming away. They shoot all this VR footage for the sports leagues, including the NBA, and more and more you start to hear petabytes, which are, for those who are not familiar, thousands of terabytes. So if you're over a petabyte of data storage, you're getting up there. But it's more and more common nowadays. It used to be like this crazy number that you never would encounter in the real world, and now more and more often we do. So, okay, great. And also I want to introduce Veronica Jung from Harvard Entrepreneurs Association. Do you want a mic, actually?
I don't actually need one.
Oh, okay.
Thanks everyone for coming. My name is Veronica Jung. I'm one of the co-chairs of the New York City chapter of Harvard Alumni Entrepreneurs, which has chapters all over the country, and now we're looking to establish chapters in cities like London and Dubai and India, and the list goes on. At our last happy hour, Eleanor and Sam came up to me and said, "Hey, I really want to do a program on AI in the media. What do you think?" And I said, "Fantastic," because as it is, all of our membership have been expressing a great deal of interest in this area, as a cutting-edge issue. We did one about a month ago on AI, just in general, like in law and other industries. So this will be a part of a series. We've got one coming up, on cryptocurrency. And the purpose of our organization is really, it involves not only alumni from all the schools of Harvard, but it's really open doors to pretty much anyone in the New York City community that is interested in being part of an ecosystem of mutually supportive entrepreneurs. And so we really want this not to be a community of people just coming to take, whether it's programming or connections through the networking, but of folks who are willing to give back. So we really invite you to just continue engaged with our chapter, and I see a lot of familiar faces. Thanks to Sam and Eleanor for putting this together, and thanks to the panelists for coming out tonight, especially on the eve of Passover and Easter coming up. So this is a really great turnout. I'm told by Eleanor that we had 180 people who are RSVP for this. So thank you, and please enjoy the program.
And there are more seats.
There are more seats, by the way. Folks are in the back.
There are more seats over here if anybody
on that side.
wants to
And
grab.
also down the edges, there's a few, but
And
definitely a
there's
little
plenty
more
of
on the
food,
left.
so just to help us out, please, nosh as we're going.
Don't graze, yes, feel free to graze. Okay, so with that, let me introduce our panel. Obviously, you just met Eleanor, so that's great. And then coming down from there, we have Grant Nodine from the NHL, who's going to tell us about all the cool stuff that he's doing. We have Jim Kennedy from the Associated Press, and we have Scott Bounds from Microsoft. So he can not only talk about Microsoft generally, but he's also a domain expert in their artificial intelligence and media practice. So that's why he's on the panel. So he's a twofer. Okay, so what we were thinking we would do in terms of format is a few of us have prepared a few slides, but we're trying to go light on the slides and heavy on the conversation. So I'll kind of introduce each person to walk through their slides. In some cases it's 3 or 4, in other cases it's 0. We're good. And then we'll get through that probably at around probably 7:10, and then the following hour or so will be wide open conversation with some moderation. Maybe Eleanor and I will try and steer things in particular directions, but really it's up to you folks and what you want to learn from this visit. That being said, how many people here, just a quick show of hands, how many people here are in technology, kind of broadly defined? Quick show of hands. Okay, so about half. And how many are more in media side of things? How many folks are in media? Okay, maybe a quarter. And a few of the same hands. So, you know, I think we can use that to kind of inform the discussion. And obviously AI is a very hot topic in the world today, so we want to make sure that we can cover it specifically its relevance to media, but if you have questions that range outside that, be happy to address those. So let me actually plug in the video so we can get the deck going. And there was an adapter here, I think it was this one.
That's not the one.
It's not the one?
Yes, it is.
It is.
That's the high-tech dongle. With one of
Very high tech, yes. All right. All right, good. So Eleanor, over to you. Hang on a
Great.
sec, and let me just.
Thank you.
Oops.
So advances this.
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm Eleanor Powers. I'm an independent consultant, and I work here out of New York City with digital content publishers. I specialize.
I might. Could you hold up the mic more, or we can
Do you
turn
need
this?
it?
What's
use
that?
that.
No, you go for it.
Got it. So I specialize in working with, how's this? I specialize with evaluating business strategies and developing best practices.
Can folks hear it okay? Yeah. Not well? Maybe
How's
that's
that?
yeah.
Okay. I do this from a financial and operational perspective, so I'm not a technologist. Examples of areas that I've worked in recently include distributed content publishing, paid content strategies, and over-the-top. So in order to better understand how publishers are using artificial intelligence in their businesses, I talked with executives from major content publishers that I've worked with previously, and I did this with different types of publishers across the board, including TV and cable, companies coming out of the newspaper and magazine industry, as well as digital natives. And when I say content publishers, I'm really focusing in on businesses that create content, original content, and publish it, as opposed to social media platforms that are taking content from other companies. These conversations were off the record, and I used them to ask the publishers what kind of core business challenges they're facing and how they're using artificial intelligence to meet these across their core functional areas of content, product, and monetization. And so basically use this to develop a rich sampling of how artificial intelligence is being used. So within the content and the product functions, the core challenges that publishers are facing include the complexity of the publishing environment as well as consumer disintermediation. And by complexity, I'm talking about complexity on multiple levels. Publishers are publishing to multiple third-party platforms, including social media, search, and over-the-top channels, which include branded over-the-top as well as third-party distribution. In addition to that, consumers are increasingly interested in a variety of different types of content, but especially audio and video, and this has a set of enormous challenges for the publishers. And then publishers are also having to deal with the consumption of their content across multiple devices. So one of the results of the publishing to third-party platforms is that publishers are being disintermediated, and especially at the top of the funnel, which is incredibly complicated for them because most new users to their sites are getting to know about their brands through reading articles on Facebook or looking at posts on Twitter. So this has enormous data implications. There's very bad data value exchange between the third-party platforms and the publishers. So publishers really don't know who these people are. They don't know what they're reading, and it's hard for them to recognize them when they come back to their sites. So across the areas of content and product, publishers have been using artificial intelligence to manage the complexity and to inform and help develop much deeper, broader, and higher quality content to more deeply engage their readers. In product, they are using artificial intelligence mainly for personalization, which it has the implication of being able to better treat the consumer as he or she comes into the top of the funnel, and to be able to drive them down the funnel if you are in a publisher that's got a paid content business model, to paid conversion or to renewal for a consumer who's already paying for the product. So in terms of the area of monetization, there are also a number of core challenges. First among these is the marketer disintermediation. There's also consumer trust issues and lack of opportunity for growth in monetization. Marketer disintermediation, by that what I'm referring to is the Luma landscape that everybody is familiar with, of the relationship between marketers and publishers and the literally thousands of companies that are between the two of them that have the net result that publishers are receiving less than 25 cents on the dollar that the marketer spends in advertising in the marketplace. So in terms of consumer ad blocking, now I think it's an estimated 20% of desktop users and 10% of mobile users are blocking ads. So this has enormous implications for publishers who are supporting their businesses off of advertising. And in terms of constrained opportunities, here we're talking about the duopoly where Facebook and Google are basically represent 60% of the digital advertising revenue in the United States, and are capturing, I think it's 50% of the growth year over year. So that basically leaves it a zero-sum game for the publishers in terms of opportunities for growth. So in terms of how publishers are using artificial intelligence within this broader landscape, they're mainly using it in a number of different ways to strengthen the relationship between the publisher and the marketer for the programmatic direct strategies as well as native advertising strategies that they're using. So these are two different ways that publishers are going directly to the marketer instead of going through the Lumascape to deal with revenue capture. In addition to that, the use of these technologies has the added benefit of making advertising more relevant to the consumer, so they're less likely to revert to using an ad blocker. In terms of developing alternative sources of revenue, publishers are also using artificial intelligence to strengthen the process of nudging someone down the sales funnel to a conversion and to a renewal. So in developing subscription businesses, they're able to diversify and strengthen their overall business and provide an avenue for growth. So these are the major themes that I heard about from the executives that I talked to, and I think we'll be hearing some more about them from the rest of the panelists.
Great. Thank you much. All right. Next up, we have Jim from the AP.
Sure.
If you want to.
I'm Jim Kennedy, and I'm the head of strategy and corporate development for the AP. And just to give you a little bit of background, I think everybody knows what the Associated Press is in some way, shape, or form. We cover the world. We cover all the stories from Mr. Trump to every sport and business and major events around the world. Our content reaches about two-thirds of the world's population. Two-thirds of the world's population on a given day. So we have quite a broad reach. It might seem counterintuitive that at a 172-year-old companies up here talking about innovation, but that's how we've been able to hang around for 172 years, and really from the start, the organization was rallied around the publishers who began the AP back in 1846, rallied around the newfangled technology of the telegraph. Before that, they rallied around the fastest horse they could get. But soon enough, they learned how to harness the telegraph, and really we've been focused on innovation and speed ever since. In the last few years, I've been in most of the speeches and panel discussions that I'm invited to give and beyond are all about this subject. And it's because 4 years ago, we stumbled into a project that became transformative for us. And it was started out a very simple project to automate the creation of narrative text directly from structured data. And we got together with a startup company called Augmented Insights from North Carolina, and they figured out a way for us to turn structured data directly into stories without human intervention. We started with a simple POC around the NFL. Every week we produce 300 little stories on every single offensive player based on their statistics, and which was a task that no human would ever want to tackle. And then we went from there to the really big breakthrough was we automated the 4 times a year all the corporate earnings stories that we write. So the business news staff of the AP has about 50 or so reporters. The music ground to a halt 4 times a year, and all those 50 reporters had to grind out earnings reports as public companies reported. I know that for a fact because I was the business editor from 1989 to 1995. So what we did was, and we only covered 300 or 400 companies out of the 3,000 or 4,000 companies in the public stock markets. So we entertained this idea of applying that technology that we've proven with the NFL project and applied it to corporate earnings. And now we're generating corporate earnings stories on every single story in the stock market. And in fact, Stanford University did a study of our impact and determined that we had increased the liquidity of the stock market because of the long tail of those companies were now finally getting coverage. Our content goes everywhere, so we're covering 3,000, 4,000 stories. Those stories are finding a home in newspapers and websites and broadcast stations and native digital outlets around the country. So that's how we got into this, and as I said, it was sort of stumbling into it. But then we realized we've been around 172 years, right? We realized what we had. So automation and eventually AI became a very strategic plank of our overall strategy for the company. And that's because we operate today in an oversupplied news market. That's the fundamental thing that's going on in the media is that the market is oversupplied with news. We're a B2B company. And all of our customers are also suppliers to that market. Of course, we have users who are generating user-generated content all day long and adding to the supply, and it just increases every day. So that relentless increase in supply is not going to go away. So how do you compete in an oversupplied market? You got to compete for more and better at the same time. So you got to have quantity, so you don't get washed out by the flood of other content, and you've got to have quality. So by employing automation and soon enough AI, and I'll talk about some of the other things over the course of the panel, we're able to do both. And how does that work? Well, automation can create new content. You know, those extra corporate earnings stories we weren't covering before, the new sports stories. We've now gone into minor league baseball. We're covering minor league baseball for the first time, and we don't cover it with humans. It's based on statistics. So we're creating new supply, and at the same time, we're freeing up our human beings to do higher order journalism. And you can draw a straight line from that automation effort to increasing the quality of the AP News report. So that's what's driving our strategy in this area. It's a fundamental, goes right down to the fundamentals of supply and demand. We've done a report on the impact of AI in journalism, and I invite you to check that out and it's not just about the AP. It's a reported, essentially a reported story about all of the activity going on across the industry. Thank you.
Okay, super. With that, over to Grant.
Not sure I'm going to need the mic. I'm going to try to avoid it. If you can't hear me, let me know, okay?
I'll turn it off.
There you go. So my name is Grant Nodine. I've been at the National Hockey League for nearly 18 years. Prior to that, I co-founded a .com dev company in the Silicon Alley age, and prior to that, I worked in commercial post-production. So I've been a technology person surrounded by media for about 26 years. Over that time period, obviously, lots of things have changed. We had SD video that we could barely move around a frame at a time, to the point where we're zinging 4K video across the globe, with latencies under a second. So pretty amazing advances over that time period. At the NHL, I mean, we're really looking at AI as an opportunity to add to existing revenue streams and enhance existing revenue streams and create new ones. There's not an AI company that's built a new technology under the sun that hasn't been talked to me recently. I've talked to a couple of folks that are using Dolby AC4 audio and some of the technologies that are wound into that to identify product placements within live content, so that they can basically process the audio using AI and basically identify times where they say a player has scored a goal and surface a e-commerce link to that player's jersey, to the skates that he wears, the sticks that he uses, and things like that. Pretty cool stuff, and that's all just audio. Video is vital to our business in so many ways. We use video extensively to determine whether a goal is a goal on the ice. Night in, night out, we have 1,300 plus events a year. Our archive is currently at 67 petabytes of video content, which is about 225,000 hours of video, over 8 million photographs, 50,000 historical documents, including every score sheet of every game that's ever been played. We just turned 100 this year, so my job is to kind of look for opportunities to use new technologies to surface new opportunities, but also to make sure that our archive continues to survive and continues to grow and continues to expand its reach for the next 100 years. Really, we've been focused on a lot of areas AI-wise. Video, the holy grail for us is really kind of being able to use video to track players on the ice. We think that can both improve the coaching and the product on the ice, but we also think it can improve the broadcasts, improve opportunities for fans to personalize their experience of viewing content online. There are a tremendous number of opportunities related to AI and processing video, and the tools that are available now versus even 18 months ago are pretty amazing. The stuff that Microsoft, Google, and Amazon have done in the cloud with stuff like TensorFlow, obviously, which is pretty low level, but Google's just announced AutoML, which is kind of a middle ground between people that are looking to do more than say, hey, there's a guy with a beard in this image, and maybe identify a little bit more information about that guy to allow you to layer some customizations that matter to your business on top. Recognition and some of the stuff that Amazon is doing with Kinesis are very interesting. Admittedly, and I apologize to Scott that I'm not as up to date on Microsoft's offerings right now.
I'll let you know in a minute.
I'm sure that you're going to fix that, Scott. But very excited about the opportunities that we have. I think we've been festooning cameras all over our arenas for various tests, and have really gotten to the point where we want to be able to go and identify who's on the ice at any given time. We currently have 6 off-ice officials that basically are using laptops with furious typing to basically keep all that information for us now at 1,300 plus events. So I think you can see why, just at a very basic level, being able to use AI to say, hey, who's on the ice, it would be a serious business benefit. I don't want to give away everything because we have a panel that we want to have a conversation. So I'm going to move on to the next panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, I actually think I'm next.
Okay.
Out of physical order here, so let me just talk a bit about Axle AI and what we do. It's actually a good progression because I think as we've gone from Eleanor to Jim to Grant, we're sort of working our way from the broader distribution side back to more content creation in Grant's case. And where my company fits in is we do software for people that are just shooting way too much video in a variety of disciplines. Of course, they don't think it's too much, but they have to deal with it every day. And this is actually a photo of one customer site that I couldn't resist snapping about a year ago. But it's by no means unique. They basically go out with, HD or 4K or 6K cameras, and they come back with just boatloads of hard drives. Sometimes they're in duffel bags, sometimes they're the little SD cards instead, and then it's a whole stack of them, like a deck of playing cards. And it's usually measured in again, this word, terabytes of stuff from each shoot. One of our biggest customers is actually not far from here in Midtown. It's Bleacher Report. This is their website, and this is a big month for them with March Madness. But we just did an announcement with them in partnership with Amazon. So again, Microsoft's going to have to come back and bring it here. But basically, in the case of Amazon, it's with their transcoding service, not their AI services yet. And so what we're doing is we're providing the media management that lets them search through 700 terabytes of material, which is constantly changing. And they have a combination of human input, people that are manually tagging all this footage, and they're just starting to bring AI into their practice. But you can only imagine they're capturing dozens of video feeds all the time. They're getting content from the web all the time, and that 700 terabytes of storage that they have turns over about 25% per year. So that's several hundred new terabytes of material just for this one property, which does, obviously they're a very fast-growing property, but they're in sports. There are comparable companies like BuzzFeed and News, or Cheddar here downtown, who's also a customer of ours in business news and so forth. So it's a pretty fascinating space, and everybody is inundated with too much footage. And Grant, what did you say? You're at 67 petabytes?
Yeah, we have 67 petabytes with the growth rate of about 6.5 petabytes a year.
Okay, so that's the very high end. I'll give you that. But these folks aren't any slouches either. We have a whole lot of customers that are in this broader space, and you can go even to like a music festival. Some of the bigger music festivals will have hundreds of terabytes or petabytes of material that they've shot over the last few years. So what we do, what our software does, is it catalogs all this media without disrupting what the customer's already doing. And in that way, we're able to deliver more metadata to them without any major disruption to their day-to-day business. And we also kind of democratize access to these technologies. You hear about things like TensorFlow, for instance. But even the higher level stuff, like Microsoft's Video Indexer, for instance, these are specific tool sets, and they have programming interfaces or APIs. Somebody has to write code to talk to them. And the average content creation team doesn't have a programmer or a team of programmers to do that. They just want to see a browser interface. They want it to look a little bit like Google Docs or Dropbox. They want to be able to find their stuff. They want to be able to search the metadata. And that's pretty much what our software does for them. And to give you some context, we're talking about these huge enterprises, Associated Press, for instance. But there are actually about 250,000 video post-production teams in the world today, and that's expected to double to about 500,000 over the next 5 years. So there are tons of people doing this, and it's not all big guys. To give a total counterexample, there's an independent filmmaker who's on our website, and she went to an ashram in India, and they asked her, oh, we have all this video footage over the years, would you become our librarian? So she took it all back with her, and using our software, she's one person, she works from her home, she's cataloged, the tens of terabytes of material from this ashram, and then she uses our web interface to let them search it from India, so totally, who knew kind of thing. And there's a bunch of reasons why it's happening now, but I think the key is that, as Grant pointed out, just in the last 18 months, this stuff has become viable, right? It didn't even work 18 months ago. It somewhat works now, and I think over the next 18 to 24 months, it's really going to start working extremely well. So there's that. There's the dropping cost of storage, which allows us to all talk about terabytes and petabytes. I remember when installing a storage system with a couple of terabytes was a really big deal. Like a terabyte would fill a rack. And nowadays, of course, it's itty-bitty hard drive or even an SSD. And then the accessibility is also important. It used to be that you would have to build applications almost custom for each customer. And today, with browser interfaces and just sort of acceptance that, hey, if I click on a folder, I see what's in the folder, and people kind of get it. You don't have to build those custom apps anymore. You can do it through a browser and make it accessible from mobile devices and again, democratize it. So we're going to an extreme. We're even building a little box that you can hook up to your storage that will allow people to just kind of plug and play with this. Because we think that the future is in those 250,000 sites. With all due respect to the big media companies, there's just only so many of those. And there are many, many more of the small filmmakers and the high school sports teams and the wedding videographers and so forth. So that's it for me, and over to Scott from Microsoft, who we actually partnered with. I should mention that our absolute favorite tool set for this is the Microsoft Video Indexer tool set. Google and Amazon are doing great things. There's independent third parties that are also doing great things, and there's billions of dollars being spent. But in terms of a broad portfolio, particularly including speech recognition and object recognition and face recognition, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but the Microsoft tool set we found to be very complete and robust. So with that, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot. So, let's talk about AI. So AI is probably the new cloud, which was the new collaboration. So it's really overblown term. But what do we really mean by AI? So the stuff that we're talking about, let's be clear, this was science fiction 4 years ago. This didn't exist. So what's really brought this to the forefront where we can actually do this? It's really two things. One is this huge amount of compute power. So if you take a look at the compute power that is actually sitting in data centers, and Microsoft has more data, basically regions across the world than Google and Amazon combined, but the sheer amount of processing power. So we're getting really geeky with Moore's Law, but it's insane, the amount of processing power. The other thing is data. So really what you can do now is with the amount of data that you can collect, whether it's if you want to do translation or this video AI, now you have data with computing power, and probably the one thing that you also need is a data scientist. So probably the hardest person, when you think about this AI, if you want to go really down in the weeds, you kind of have, we talk about ML models and TensorFlow and neural networks, blah, blah, blah. How do you find a data scientist? And how does that go up? Like, what do you want? Do you want an end product that you just consume, or do you want to build it yourself? So that's what you think about with AI. And I would say, especially in media, it's really early days. So the whole idea is, what do you use this for? And I'll say right now, we're early from Microsoft. We're basically plumbers, right? So we are putting functionality out there. What does that mean to a media company? So a lot of the conversations I'm having, and I'd probably say 80% of the conversations I have this day is around video AI and cognitive services and all of this, is how does it fit into your workflow? What's the ROI? So if you want to say, well, I want to do something around AI, where's it going to be? There's a couple things that are coming up. We can talk about all these things, but at the same time, you want to do a project, you're going to have to show some ROI for the investment. We see things like compliance a lot. So I got a piece of video. I'm here in the US, maybe on a cable network, maybe I'm online. I can do all kinds of stuff, right? So, but hey, I want to sell this internationally. I want to put that clip even if it's a sports clip, I want to sell that clip to other countries. Hey, I have a football clip. It's Saudi Arabia. There's a cheerleader. She can't show a bare shoulder. I need to flag that. Someone needs to cut that out. Someone needs to take a look at, you can't show a lit cigarette in Turkey. So think about all these rules of what you can show and as you go from compliance. I have a piece that airs at 11 o'clock on Viceland. Now put that same on an airplane. What do you have to cut? What do you have to chop? So think about all those different cuts. How can you use technology to automate that? Or at least, we're not saying automation. I mean, we could talk about, actually it's pretty cool that we have automation talking about creating content. We usually stay around away from that because it's really early days and we don't want to talk to the creatives about computers taking their job. So, but anyway, so the fundamentals that we build these things on, I would say a couple things. One is vision. What can you actually see? Photos, video, what's actually there? Faces, emotions, sentiment, objects. What's actually there from vision? Speech. What's actually there from the standpoint of speech to text, keywords, translation, all that stuff around language. So now, like for example, we can translate 60 plus languages, including Klingon. And actually,
That's
being
very
technology.
Microsoft of you.
Oh yeah, exactly. But like 30 of those are first line. We're not talking about doing a translation word to word. We're talking in the context of grammar because you have a big enough data set you can do that. You can even create your own library. So if I have a general process here that I'm actually doing for speech to text, we're going to a computer geeky thing and we're talking about Kubernetes containers and all of this lingo. I can add custom libraries so I know what you're actually talking about. So you really get down. Now, these are the things we're talking to companies about. I mean, right now we have a POC where they're giving us our subtitles in English and we're translating to other languages and comparing, right? What's the humans versus the computers? There's all this other stuff around knowledge and search, etc. How does this all work together? I'm not going to drain this slide, but we have this thing that we thought about these. It was actually a garage project. We have all these cognitive services. We have about 29 of them we're shipping to do different things. I can find faces. I can find sentiment of faces. I can look at emotions. I can do all this stuff. We actually built something to demo this. So, hey, we want that as a product. And when we mentioned a video indexer, these are the things that we can do. You got a piece of video. You upload that. It's a proxy. We don't. When we talk about the sizes, I was just at a studio and a movie production is coming in now at 1 petabyte to 1.5 per movie. That's what's going in. You have so much stuff in there. So imagine a piece of video. Could be scripted content, could be other things. What I can do is I can find the faces. I can find faces there. I can recognize people. So we have this little thing called Bing. We do a lot of celebrities and people's faces. We can identify a few 100,000 people. But I can create my own face library. So now I have the faces, especially news. I can say who those faces are. I have context around if they're the speech to text. I also have sentiment from the words. Once you do speech to text, we can pull out keywords. So if you have an hour-long interview, we can pull out those keywords that they can then feed into a recommendation engine. OCR on the screen, brand detection, what speakers, identification, content moderation, all this kind of stuff. So what you're getting now is you're taking that. If you have a library, you probably have some tags that some humans put on there. Now you can open that up. So say someone dies, Don Rickles dies. So hey, I know I can go to my library, maybe someone tagged Don Rickles. But hey, we got this great clip of Jerry Seinfeld talking about Don Rickles. No one would ever log that. Speech to text would actually find it. And we're also going further. You're seeing emotion. So basically, what I can say now is in this video, I want to know where Donald Trump is angry and he's talking about XYZ. Or I need to do, where is Tom Cruise sitting on a motorcycle holding a Coke can because I know we get a check. So we have to cut a check or we get a check or things like that. And we're also looking at things like live and emotion. Now, what's a real case scenario? So we talk about this. There's a little show called Big Brother. So Endemol Shine actually makes Big Brother. So think about this. I've talked to other people going reality TV. So if you have reality TV, there was this one show, I think it's like an upstairs, downstairs on a cruise ship or something, but you're filming 24/7. A lot of these reality shows, they would film, these guys got done filming in November, and it was the following July, and they still hadn't cut the episodes. So imagine you have hours and hours and hours. What you can just do in the pre-production standpoint is speech to text, facial recognition. I know who's saying what, so I can actually find in those hours what I want to find, because we know reality is really scripted. You want to find that piece of video. being able to find all of that and open that up. So these are the type of scenarios that we're seeing on the pre-production side, and that can feed all the way through to monetizing archives and productions and driving more eyeballs on your site, engagement, blah, blah, blah. So lots of cool stuff, but I say really early days, and really folks in the media industry are going to drive how this actually happens and what this is being used for, because we really understand technology, you understand media, and then how do those two things really come together to make it useful for you? So,
Awesome. So I hope that gave you a reasonable overview of the space. Obviously, this is, I think, between the folks here on the panel, we could probably answer nearly any question except for maybe super deep technological questions about neural networks. We may be missing like the neural net guru that we would need for that. But short of that,
I got some guys upstairs I can maybe go track down.
Exactly. Yeah. And by the way, neural networks are an interesting kind of sleeper story here because people have been talking about them for 20 or 30 years. And as Scott pointed out, they only really became viable in the last 2 or 3 years because of the computing power available. Up until then, they were sort of, the redheaded stepchild that never really accomplished much. And then all of a sudden, people went back and, every few years there'd be a little surge in research budget to check these things out. And I guess in that last little wave, maybe 5 years ago, some of the stuff actually started working. Some of the theoretical concepts that have been percolating ever since the 70s and 80s. I see someone with a question. Yes.
At risk of asking an overly broad question, how much does this all cost to the average user?
Yeah, actually, it's a very reasonable question. Today, if you want to use this stuff on footage, the typical price range is sort of $5 to $10 per hour of processed footage, which is very reasonable if you compare it to what it would cost to have people watch that footage and manually log it. It's like an order of magnitude cheaper. Now, it's not better yet. In other words, if you have super high quality footage, like a finished movie, that you want somebody to log and get the text exactly right and get the actors' names exactly right and all that stuff, you're still better off having people do it. However, it's almost never practical to do that. And so at these price points, which are dropping, by the way, we think, over the next few years, this should come down to a couple of bucks an hour. And at that point, if you have 1,000 hours, okay, it's a couple $1,000 and you can grind through all of that footage and make sense of it. The other thing is when I talk about these per hour rates, that's including the cloud computing power to process it. And increasingly, there are also on-premise engines, which may not be quite as advanced as the latest cloud stuff, but may allow you to commoditize some of the kind of basic image recognition and speech recognition that you need to do. And those may bring it down to where it's just like, well, buy a server and run it for a year.
Yeah, so I would say with cloud, it just comes down to consumption. So think about the model in your brain you should really have is you don't think about capital investments anymore. You think about what you want to do, you turn something on, you turn it off, right? So per hour for pulling that. If you have images, it's like X number of cents per 1,000 API calls. So it's really linear and it's really able to, you don't have to have that huge upfront cost of dropping in a whole farm. And this is across the board. We're even talking about things like rendering, right? Think about special effects rendering. You don't have to buy that anymore. You can actually get per second billing for what you actually do to finish your job. So really think of the consumption models really changing it. So it's OpEx versus CapEx.
Yep. Yes.
So at our last AI event, right, the panelists were kind of defining AI as like algorithms that teach themselves, and then someone also said how the usefulness of AI is to automate like the 80% of what we don't like doing, so that we can focus on the 20 that we really enjoy. And you kind of touched upon that, Jim. In your industry, is like, what's the kind of pace? What's the pace of like learning that you're seeing in these algorithms, and what are some dangers that you may foresee as it really skyrockets in terms of speed, right? It's going into just doing functions that we can't even do as humans.
Well, I mean, I would just go. Let's go to the hardware and capital expenditure side of the equation, and basically say one of the biggest challenges is when you have an archive the size of mine, is that you want to take passes on the archive with AI as the programs mature, so that you can gain the insights that you'll get from each of those passes. Each of those passes becomes infinitely more difficult the larger your archive gets. So but they become more valuable the longer you wait. So you have this problem where you're saying, okay, well, I want to move all of my entire archive into the cloud. Okay, all right. Well, that's a big endeavor, right? So and that involves both LTO infrastructure that I have in my office, spinning disk that I have in my office, and obviously, the expense of per byte expense in the cloud, right? And I want to make sure that each time I'm moving that data around, whether it's I'm doing a PFR of an asset, our archive is largely very long assets that get 10 seconds and 20-second pieces of them used. And so partial file restore is a huge part of how our workflows work. So because I don't want to restore a 300 gigabyte game to get 10 seconds of content, right? So that's been one of the challenges moving that content into the cloud, is that PFR in the cloud doesn't kind of work just yet the way that it needs to. But every time I move that content around, whether it's from LTO to spinning disk, I'd like to take a pass at passing it through whatever AI library I'm using at that time, or whatever AI libraries I'm using at the time, so that every time that I'm moving it around, I'm leveraging the fact that it's available at that point in time. Because a lot of to make a 67 petabyte archive work in Amazon, for instance, right? You're going to want to put most of it in Glacier so that you're not paying S3 prices for 67 petabytes, which is quite expensive. So you want to make sure that when you're moving it to a more isolated state, so a state where it's harder to recrystallize it into an asset that you can actually take an AI pass at, that every time you move it in and out of that state, that you take the effort to try to identify what new insights can we get out of this data. And then so you take that and extend that to a 3 or 5 year time period, and you're starting to think about, all right, so over this 3 or 5 year time period, I expect to have these assets available for an AI pass, right, at these intervals. And so you've got this entire planning that you have to do in your head, kind of outside of what you're trying to gain out of it by passing it through an AI library.
Right, which is, yeah. And just by the way, for kind of establishing terms, so there are several tiers of storage that most people in this part of the industry have to deal with. So maybe I'll, just to...
well, I mean, to put it simply, right, so if I'm storing 1,300 events that are 3 hours plus a year, right,
yeah.
So I'm not storing, nobody stores anything on videotape anymore, I hope.
In Japan, they still do.
Or at least very soon, none of you will store anything on videotape. But so we've boiled everything down onto LTO tapes that are very dense and small. And the advantage of an LTO tape versus a piece of spinning disk is that I can take an LTO tape and put it on a shelf, and 5 years later I can go and put it in a drive, and I can have random access to that content. With the disk array, you cannot go and take a tray of disk out of your Isilon and go and put it on a shelf and expect 5 years from now to be able to plug it in and rejoin it to the array and have access to those assets again. So anybody that has an archive that's of a decent size and is got more than a couple of years worth of content on it is still putting it on LTO, or they're going directly to the Glaciers of the world. Right?
And by the way, Glacier is Amazon's low-cost tier. Microsoft has an equivalent tier, and then they also have more expensive tiers of cloud storage. So if you had to really think about the kind of layers here, at the slowest layer, you've got the slow cloud, then you've got fast cloud, then you've got LTO tape, which in some ways is similar to cloud, but it's on-premise. But in terms of its, the lag of getting things is in some ways comparable. And then you have disk, or even solid state on premise. So there's 4 or 5 layers, and you can optimize your decisions about where you put things. But what Grant's saying is there's this further problem overlaid that, like, as you move things around, it would be great to have the latest AI algorithms take a whack at them. Because chances are the last time you looked at that footage, the AI wasn't any good. And even if you were to take it today, you know for sure it's going to be a lot better in 18 months. So essentially, it behooves you to take a whack at it every time it comes through, but then you've got to add in that cost, and you've got to try and optimize for the combination of cost structure for where you store things against how often you get to take another pass at analyzing those things, and then of course what the market value of those things is, because you could burn a giant hole in your budget just analyzing everything to death, and then you realize like these are games that nobody cares about from years that didn't matter on teams that sucked, right? and so then it's like, well, why did I analyze all that? Nobody cares, right? At the same time,
Just analyze the Ranger content. That's all that matters.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, yeah, I think also when you think about your question. And from Microsoft, we have two different groups. We actually have product development. The stuff that we talk about here is actually development, shipping. We also have this whole wing of Microsoft research. And when you talk about this, you're like, that's 2 years ago. But when you look at the researchy side, some of the stuff that's coming down, yeah, it is kind of scary. You're like, hey, is this really Terminator self-aware stuff? And you'll see a lot of the leaders out there, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, said you got to think about some ethical things there. But things that I've seen that I know we've actually done is there's this whole idea of basically, if you think about it, you can put two bots against each other, and basically they battle each other and they learn. Perfect example. If you think about, there was one example that I saw where want to teach about birds, right? And you have a detector and someone teaching about birds. And what I'm talking about here, like if I asked a computer, show me a black bird with a orange beak and a yellow belly or something, this isn't searching through all my pictures that I have. Create something new. So what you're seeing is AI is being able to create a bird that doesn't really exist by what it knows about birds to meet that. You're also being able to take a look at things where, especially on the news side, you really think of what you can actually create. They actually, I've seen stuff as well where you take a profile shot of someone and you take a full facial front, give the AI the profile, build me a face shot, full, give me the face shot of both of them. Tell me which one's computer generated and which one's real. But you can't do it, And you're getting things like that where also even from a copyright standpoint, you copyright content, you can't copyright essence and style. So you can actually take an AI and I could pull out the style. So I could say this is the style of, whatever, Van Gogh or whatever, and then apply that to other pieces of content. So you're getting to that type of stuff, and you're really getting that type of advanced things that you could really think about, especially in the media side. That's some of the, especially with the whole idea of like what's real and what's not from a news standpoint, and what's real news versus something that's generated. That's kind of scary. I mean, robot insurance, I know it's an old Saturday Night Live skit, but yeah. And then these guys up in Boston with those robots with the dog that opens the door and these robots falling over, scares the hell out of me.
Yes.
To the gentleman from AP, this is touching on reality. Can you describe what your organization does to protect us as consumers?
Yeah, and I was just going to add that this is about the reason we don't refer to it as robotic journalism or artificial intelligence. We have a term for it. We call it augmented journalism. The machines are augmenting the human work, and the only thing that's really working at scale right now at the AP is natural language generation, which is really is a rules-based technology that just cranks. That's the corporate earnings reports that are done with structured data that we write the templates. We get a data feed, and the thing just cranks at scale. Machine learning is another big step, which we're just now starting to get into, teaching machines to write a story in different formats. So taking a story that was destined for print and turning it into a broadcast story, so a story meant to be spoken, and ultimately into different voices. A looser, less serious voice versus a very serious voice. So that's the next step. And then when we get into the imagery, it gets we haven't put any of that stuff to work at scale yet because it doesn't work in real time yet, and so the humans are still doing all that work. We're doing all the scripts for all the videos that we put out. The captions for the pictures obviously are all human, still done by human beings. When it comes to where all this could go, as far as the idea of turning a side shot into a facial front shot. But we're never going there, and because that is we don't airbrush Coke cans out of the movie star's living room. We've just never done that, and we're not going to do that. And in fact, we've set very strict standards. We have a standards policy around the use of any augmented journalism now. It's in the AP style book. It's part of the rules of the road now. So we're also using AI. We will be using AI to verify photos and video. We're working on a project right now to help speed up that process of verifying photos and video that are shot by users.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about some of the stuff that you even test now, like we do, imagine auto captioning a photo. So you can upload a photo and using AI, using vision, you know what's in the photo, and automatically create a caption for that photo about what it's about. This is a woman hitting a tennis ball. This is someone skiing. We're doing the same thing by right now detecting motion. Like if you have a piece of video, what's that video about? So think about those captionings to put that metadata in.
But what would happen in that scenario in the real world is that even if a machine could do that sort of well, it would still go through an editing process and be checked and verified and polished before it went out.
Yeah,
assisting humans, not replacing humans.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I just want to give one example, and then we'll get to your question. One great example, we were doing proofs of concepts for our clients, and we did one a few months back that involved footage from a baseball game. And most of the tags were right on, home run, umpire, great, and then it said card game. And we're like, what's that about? So we scrubbed in our software. You can kind of scrub to that place based on the tag. So we went there, and what it was the manager and two of the players leaning over the edge of the dugout, which had a green front to it. So if you were to flip it, it looked like three guys sitting at a card table. And it had actually said, well, if you see three guys next to a rectangular object, it's probably a card game. But obviously, if that went out as an AP tag, that would be a problem, right? So the error rates are still 5, 10, 15%, and it's definitely not yet a replacement for any kind of human work. But a year ago the error rates were 50%, and 2 years from now they may be down to 2 or 3%.
I will say on the rules-based technology, the natural language generation, data to text, humans don't touch those stories. They build up on them. If a story comes out, the next version might have more human intervention with a quote or something from an expert or from a source, but they start out directly generated by the machine, and they make fewer mistakes than the humans used to do.
I don't disagree. I guess my request is in 2010, Congress did not pass a law on that altered photographs needed to have a tagline that says this is photograph has been altered by Facebook, not by Photoshop or whatever. I would hope that the industry would take that step forward and say, this is real, this is not.
Every story every one of those 3,000 corporate earnings stories has a footer on the bottom of the story that goes out with it that says this was generated by software.
Okay.
And,
Of course, you're talking about putting the fashion industry out of business with that, right? I mean, what would they do all day?
Yeah, but you're also thinking about ways to detect things that are fake. Like there's one example that I know of where, hey, it's a video. I think it was a video from like Syria, right? So it's basically somebody's there as a terrorist, he gets shot, right? Is that a real video? Turns out it's not, but how you could tell is the video footage in the museum was real. It's a person there. You can actually find that because the date of the actual person being shot, behind him is a artifact that was in the museum that was removed 6 months prior. So that's how you could actually track that back. But think about the fake news detector and how could you use AI to flag those, especially when you
can do simple stuff like the weather of the if it's an outside shot, was it raining or not, kind of thing, and that could be checked. But when you get down to when we try to verify a photo or a piece of video, we find the person who shot it.
Mm-hmm.
We talk to them. We don't just use it.
We had a similar kind of problem with that we solved with AI actually with we weren't tracking for some reason goals that were overturned subsequently, right? So we weren't able to go into the video and say here's where that goal that was overturned happened. we were able to identify every goal that's been scored in the 100 years of footage that we have. Well, not 100 years, but thereabouts. But we weren't able to identify any of those events, and so we actually went and we trained TensorFlow to look at each image and identify identify frames of video where a guy wearing a black and white striped shirt with an orange armband was pointing like this to the net, because that's the sign in hockey for a goal. And so we basically were able to go through an entire season of games in a fairly small amount of time. It was about 10 days that it literally chewed through all this and identified all the locations where we had a referee making that motion that we had not recorded a goal. And so that it actually solved the real world problem.
Pretty good, yeah. You've been waiting for, yeah.
Speed is the news business. How do you verify? You get a photo from North Korea. You know, A, B, and C are there. B's missing. Know when to ask. How do you run with it?
We have people in 200 plus locations around the world, including North Korea, and everything that we harvest from the social networks or wherever user generated submissions, we actually verify all the way down to the person who took the picture or shot the video. So we don't just go with it and say this is we found this on the social networks and put it out. We have a verification process that steps through it. Now we are trying to put some automation behind that, but it will always be run by a human.
Yes, but North Korea controls social media. They control the cutouts and the straw people. So how do you verify that? Because your paradigm would work in, let's say, a democracy, but in a situation like that, how do you handle it?
It's not the stuff that comes out of our bureau from North Korea is not censored. It's watched, but it's not censored.
Yes.
A lot of the discussion which we're talking about is on post-processing or semantic search later post. Is there any work being done on content delivery AI or AI in real-time analysis while content is being delivered, or you're dependent on bandwidth from mobile networks or things like that?
There is some. I know people are talking right now. If you think about an early use, is a lot of people in news and sports. They're like, hey, we actually demoed it last year in NAB, like a real-time closed captioning. So basically, you take a live audio feed and being able to do the speech to text, in close. There's going to be a gap there, at least a little bit of a buffer. But they're definitely looking at that. Some of the things that you saw from the analytics were identifying faces and emotions. That's looking to be closer and closer to real time, so you don't have to put the whole file up there too. So.
The other thing I should add, there's a whole host of companies that are trying to kind of be the next Nielsen, but provide much closer to real-time analytics.
Yeah.
I was actually on a panel at the last IBC here with a guy named Ed Haslam, the name of this company, but they did that. They raised about $40 million just to monitor viewer habits in response to knowing the content they were watching and then trying to kind of reach out until they were more onto the device.
Once again, we're talking about video, but on the flip side, where you actually are consuming things. So we actually developed this content recommendation engine for MSN. So basically, an editor used to do the whole homepage, right? Put all the stories where they are on the homepage. And what they do now is they pick the top 30. So in runtime, we know about you. Even if you're anonymous, I know where you're coming from, time of day, and if I know you, I might even know what you've actually watched. We also have a lot of information on that content. So what you're seeing is a piece of content actually has metadata that's manually put in there by a human. We're also extracting some of this stuff out. And then in real time, what we're doing is running this AI model to take those stories in, put it for, if I would come in, versus Steve coming in, they would actually look different. So, and in that model, since we have the volume on MSN, that learning model actually updates every 7 minutes. So when you see breaking news, so if you ever go to MSN homepage or you open up like Edge, whatever that is, that's actually customized for you. That's on those models. So it's pretty interesting.
So building on that, the content recommendation engines are being used, not just for the type of article that's being recommended based on your previous use, but whether you're interested in imagery, a video, or text materials on top of that. But in addition to that, it's incredibly important for digital content publishers to be able to build loyalty of the readers that they're getting, especially off of social media platforms. So to be able to look at you, the first time you come onto a site and say you're interested in articles about the law, and to be able to feed up different articles about that subject to you will actually increase the likelihood that you're going to stay on that site and that you're going to come back multiple times. And there's a lot of analysis that's been done to show that the impact is really the greatest at the top of the funnel. So this is a huge deal for publishers because in the publishing business, something like 80% of your revenue can be earned off of something like 10 to 15% of the people who come to your site. So getting people to be loyal at the top of the funnel is a really big deal. Now, there are some obvious issues in there about how broad you make your categories for content recommendations. So, you don't want to get too personal with people. You look for broad categories so you can manage the bubble and introduce them to new content that they might not be likely to see. And there are a lot of issues for publishers needing to introduce business-specific issues. For instance, one of the uses that a publisher might have for business-specific use is to be able to direct a reader to content that's accompanied by that advertising for a contract that they haven't been able to fulfill. So that's a huge deal to be able to do that. And it enables them to replace vendors like Outbrain and Taboola, which is also a really big step to be able to monetize. So those are big areas.
To give you an idea what the difference is, so I know on our side, we also did this with folks like Complex. It's kind of a social brand. I'm out of the demographic. It's all about sneakers and skate shoes and rap music. But we're seeing about a 25% uplift. But just letting the machine choose the story for engagement and consumption, we were hoping for a couple percent. We're seeing around 25 usually with most of the companies who are looking at doing things like this, which is a huge, and also frees up a lot of the humans so they don't have to do that.
And so with the publishers that I've talked to, they won't even talk to a vendor if they're not able to look at a lift that's equivalent to 10% or more. And if they're looking to build a capability internally, the business case has usually got to be something in the neighborhood of a 25% lift.
In the back. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one point on even as a B2B supplier, we have a version of this because our products are big fire hoses, so thousands of stories, thousands of pictures, hundreds of video clips in the course of a day, and our customers struggle with that, so we want to make it possible for them to receive sort of a bespoke version of the output, and so over the next 2 years we're working on that. So it also enables us to give people a lower entry point into the AP, so they don't have to buy the big fire hose to start. They can come in at a lower entry point, and then they can buy up from there based on a recommendation engine.
Yes. Now, is this being rolled out over multiple platforms? And how are you preparing yourselves for the future? How technology continues to evolve? What are the advancements, whether it's been sort of coming down the pipe?
Well, I'm going to use this as a way to call out our friends at NetApp here and say, wouldn't it be nice if when you put your media bits, no matter what they are, text, images, video, onto your media storage, that your media storage's file system actually goes and does an AI pass on your media as you're storing it. And I think that you could make an argument that that's well within their capabilities to do. Most of us that are using very high-end SSD storage devices are not even coming close to touching the amount of IOPS that they're capable of. We could certainly do with some kind of advances on the storage front that would help us deal with that. But I mean, I think a lot of it is just about planning where you think your assets are going to be from virtually 5 years from now, and that has a lot to do with where you're putting them. Has a lot to do with what tools you're going to use to try to assess them and make them more valuable.
The gesture was more about not 5 years from now, but maybe 5 months from now.
Yeah.
The advancements of
So-
holograms now being introduced in advertising.
Yeah, so I think if you look about way modern application development is going, so we see everything going up into the cloud, right? And what you're seeing then is you're seeing microservices and you're seeing API access. So what you really are seeing is you used to have these big monolithic applications that you try to upgrade every 2, 5, 6 years, whenever you had to. What you're seeing now with the modern way with DevOps is you're seeing small components that are available via API that can be upgraded and changed very quickly. So really what you're going to be seeing now are really smart applications all being cloud-based, pulling. So basically instead of, you're really dealing with Lego blocks that you snap together that you can then access. So that's what you're seeing with modern application development. So when we think about this, like, when we see our video indexer server, we don't see people using video indexer. We see vendors like these guys or Avid or Dalet or whoever they are. They're going to take that and put it in the workflow. It's really these snapping together, and it's just a service that you would actually consume, and then you pay on your consumption. That's how we kind of see it happen with modern. So once again, that kind of modern way to think about it's really an API and a service you can prescribe. These new services you can snap in and out.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Just beyond short of the razzle dazzle of virtual reality or holograms or even AR, I think what you're going to see in the next couple of years is just this kind of technology used to generate more content for the kinds of outputs that we're getting used to. So audio first kind of use cases with the smart speakers and the smart cars, where the content will be generated in a way that the synthesized voice can actually produce it and read it to you, answer questions, take the content apart and be able to answer questions. So those are the kinds of things that I think you'll see. I also think you're going to see, because it's already starting, is new forms of video that combine audio, text overlays, moving pictures, and part video that will be put together very quickly as the first version of the story. So instead of seeing an alert that's in text, you might see an alert that's actually a moving picture. So those are the kinds of things that I think you'll see first before you see,
What I think you'll
see.
I think in that respect, you'll see data overlays over sports broadcasts that are user triggerable. So you can basically say, hey, these are my fantasy players. Highlight this guy on the field every time he's on the field. And your OTT app is very capable of doing that right now. All you really need to do is basically have a way to track the players on the field and a way for me to basically give you in real time that player's X and Y coordinates. And then all of a sudden you're basically saying, okay, I'm watching the game, but the way I'm watching it is different than the way everyone else is watching it because I've got these 4 players highlighted or this is the guy that I'm really interested in and I want him to be highlighted or so for coaching, we were looking at, hey, every time one of my guys is on the ice for longer than a minute, I want you to visually highlight them on my iPad because we put iPads on all the benches last year. So he basically says, all right, so this guy just turned red. That means he's been on the ice longer than a minute. That means I need to switch lines and I need to get him off the ice. Yeah. So it's going all the way down to affecting the competition that's happening on the field or the rink or whatever, at least in sports, right? All the way into the end user's hands.
So you're talking a lot about the content creation side of the business and the personalization part of it, but I think it's also important to look at the monetization side as well. Because there's a lot that artificial intelligence is doing on the monetization side. Starting with advertising, within the context of the publishers that I work with, there are a lot of them who are using artificial intelligence to target advertising. This is also used for targeting native advertising to content types of that you're interested specifically in reading. So it has sort of that, two-header effect that it makes the advertising more effective for the advertiser, and it also makes it a lot more interesting for the reader or the video viewer. So in addition to that, like one of the publishers that I talked to, had a really interesting business model for justifying hiring 25 people onto his staff, which was that he was basically he was taking analytics from content analysis for consumption, and he was applying it to advertising, and he was coming up with recommendations for the marketers on where to place the ad, what time of day to advertise, where to put an ad on a page, on a screen, and also for the specific creative. And based on those types of recommendations that the sales reps were making, going back to the marketers were increasing their budgets with that publisher by an estimated 10+%, which is huge. You know, this is a large publisher, that's huge. They were able to do this very well with video advertising that's usually sold out on most publishers, but they also think that they can apply it to banner advertising as well, where there could be a huge opportunity if someone could figure out how to monetize that better. So all of that is a big deal. There are also uses of, within the subscription model business, for managing people coming in with, you know, basically your newsletter sales activities. There's dynamic price offering. So there's one publisher, I think it's The Street, that's using a company, Apex Decisions, to do dynamic pricing on subscription renewals. And they're able to get an average price increase of 20%, which is a huge deal for a publication. If you went to the New York Times and said you could increase your subscription renewals by 20%, at the same time that you're increasing your subscription renewal rates, that's a big deal. Recently, Google just stepped back and took back their first click free policy, where publishers had to let people coming off of Google see 3 articles without hitting a paywall, even if you're the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. So they basically stepped back and said, okay, we no longer do that. So there's some businesses that are doing dynamic paywall management. So if you come to a paid publication, you know, once a month, they may look at you and say, you're not engaged enough, we're going to show you a lot more content and get you engaged, and then we'll hit you with a paywall and dynamic pricing and start you off at a low price because you're new. Whereas someone who's been very engaged, they'll say, you know, you come back here all the time, it's time you started paying. So, you know, that type of model as well is proving increasingly productive for publishers for monetizing.
So we have sort of been biased towards this side of the room. I think we probably should take like 2 questions from this side of the room, and then I also want to be mindful of folks' time because it is 8 o'clock in the evening. So maybe we should probably aim to wrap things up around 8:15. But I know I'll be here for a while afterwards. Probably some of the other speakers will as well, if people want to have individual conversations. So next, yes.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering if there's a need for some kind of firewall or protection around the data in the cloud storage. You know,
oh my goodness! Wow, the answer is absolutely yes.
That's an entirely different panel.
Yes.
Yes, but there's the whole world there.
Yeah. So
but,
data and security is huge. So just to let, if you're familiar with media, you know, our cloud's actually MPAA and CDSA certified. So thinking about that as you start moving it, and you know, you don't want to be. It's interesting. The cloud is probably more secure than actually on-prem. If you think about how you can actually secure it. We actually had a conversation with a media customer, and they said, it's a pretty big customer. They're like, well, how many people do you have working on security in the cloud? You know, I got 2.5. And we're like, well, actually, our general counsel goes, give me a second. You know, we have 1,000 full-time just on security, but every single product they have to build those threat models in. So you can build the security around there from electronic hacks. The physical hacks getting in are, yeah, we can talk about security there. So it's actually quite, that's the biggest thing you have to worry about, especially, you know, if you lose your content, you're sunk. That's your crown jewels.
Yes.
Mine's a little bit more of a political and an ethical question. If we go back to the mid-90s and social media and as it developed, our government, our Congress, we weren't quite having the kinds of conversations that we should have had given how we think this recent election worked and the impact of social media. Isn't it time for those involved in AI to have a global negotiation, really, on how and who is going to be determining how these algorithms work so that the planet survives, or at least America survives. I wish Mr. Kennedy was working for the head of China or the head of Russia. There's no person like you in those countries at the moment, and people are seeing things that, you know, the idea that there's a code writer at 4 o'clock in the morning in some country that's determining what we are seeing and doing is incredibly scary.
Well, I think you can't get companies to be afraid of regulation if you're unwilling to produce regulations now. So as long as our government continues to basically say we have too much regulation, right, and we're not going to regulate the Facebooks of the world, then why would any other company waste a second thinking about worrying about being regulated?
Right, it's a problem.
Well,
but the TV stations did figure it out, and have been monitored and measured and whatnot, and that's what we missed with social media. So I think AI is a much more dangerous and insidious.
I think there's a couple things, right? One is really around privacy and how you take the privacy. So so if you have a case where when you're dealing with someone, and once again, corrupt companies who do things are wrong, but you think about it, you have to have a privacy statement how you treat people's data, and they know what they're getting when they give you their data, right? Also, as a company, people who are in technology, they also you have to take a look at what they're doing. So, for example, at Microsoft, whatever you run through our cognitive engines, like if you upload a bunch of content and pictures and videos, we're not keeping anything. So that is your data that you can process. So we're not skimming that off. So when you think about what social media or even using some email platforms, they might, skim your stuff to send you ads. So
that would never happen.
Yeah, but things like that. So if I am Associated Press, or I'm somebody who's dealing a magazine in like animals, and I'm detecting snow leopards, that's your data that you can actually see there. Now, a lot of this also comes just from a personal standpoint. It comes down to the consumer, what you actually give up. So we do stuff around fan engagement and gamification. How do you get people to give up information? We took a look at, if you say, hey, I want to log in with Facebook, there are different levels of permissions. And you have to think about, from an ethical standpoint as the company, what you actually, am I going to grab your, if you say, if I use Facebook login, do I want to be able to grab everything that you have, or do I have something for you have to have a value exchange. So if I want to get data from you, and I'm building out some type of system, I have to have, we do some stuff with like Real Madrid and other sports leagues, and it's like, okay, if I connect this to my Facebook, you're going to give me some cool content. Hey, if I actually check in when I'm at the stadium, you're going to give me some cool behind-the-scenes video stuff that you wouldn't give somebody else. So part of it is a value exchange and that trust you have to build with the company. So
I don't know how to answer the political question, but
yeah,
it's also an ethical question.
But the ethical question is this. I mean, so AP used to only have to care about its own content, fact-checking its own content as it went out. Now we're fact-checking and verifying the world, and we're having to apply a whole load of new resources against that. We're actually working with Facebook to fact-check some of the material that appears on Facebook, mostly around elections in the coming midterms. But it's becoming a part of our job to fact check and verify things that that don't start as reported content on the AP. It starts in the ecosystem, and we have to verify it because it's going out there for people and people consume it. So yeah, it's becoming a new. It's actually a hallmark of the company that we're having to step up to.
Okay, I think we can take one last question and then we're going to wrap. But again, feel free to hang out. We still have plenty of food, of course, so there's that too. Any sort of take-it-home kind of question? Go ahead. Yes.
I mean, just building on this last comment, it would be we can't walk away this evening without AI media is being used for managing communication, right? China and other countries. That's the dominant use case. So I think, don't you agree with me? I don't want to.
I'd say it's the most politically pressing use case. The fact is, there's tons of people doing what Grant's doing, which is analyzing games. I don't think anyone objects to that, right? We'd all like to know when all the goals were scored in all these hockey games. It's fine.
At least I hope you would all like
yes,
that.
immediately, and hopefully for a fee. But I think, I mean, what you're saying is this is the big global issue of the moment, and it is. I'm not sure anybody here has a quick answer.
It all comes back to Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. So there's a really interesting book called Future Crime, and every technology, we think about the great things with technology, but it can be exploited the other way. Like Internet of Things. It's awesome that every night my mom's pacemaker uploads to the data or someone's insulin pump. But guess what? If I hack that, imagine you get an email that said, "Oh, by the way, give me $10,000 in Bitcoin, but in the next 48 hours, or I want to turn off your pacemaker." You have to think about that when you're designing these products, because there are people out there that have a whole different mindset when you actually do this. So it is kind of terrifying when you think about some of this. You really have to think through these scenarios and all the attack vectors and how it can be exploited.
Okay, I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks so much, everybody.
So good enough fighting. Oh, thanks. Hey, how's it going?